When nightmares don't go away. How bad dreams affect children's brains and sleep. Most people think nightmares are just bad dreams and that they end at the moment a child opens their eyes. But what if the fear, stress, and sleep disruption continue into the next day? This study starts from the idea that nightmares may not be completely separate from reality. They can be connected to a child's emotions, stress, trauma, sleep quality, and mental health. So the researchers wanted to know if chronic nightmares affect children beyond the night, can a specific therapy reduce their impact? The study I analyzed is called Efficacy of a Telehealth Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Improving Sleep and Nightmares in Children aged 6 to 17. It focused on children and adolescents who experience chronic nightmares and tests whether a telehealth therapy can help reduce them. The lead author is Lina DeMarni Cromer, a researcher from the Department of Psychology at the University of Tulsa with the affiliation to the University of Oklahoma School of Medicine. This study is credible because it was published in the peer-reviewed journal Frontiers in Sleep. It also used a randomized design with 46 children and adolescents, which makes it stronger than a general opinion article. The significance of this study is that it shows childhood nightmares should not be treated exclusively as just bad dreams. When nightmares become chronic, they can disrupt sleep, increase emotional distress, and affect a child's daily functioning. This study is important because it tests a real treatment, telehealth cognitive behavioral therapy, and found that it helped reduce nightmare frequency, nighttime awakenings, and distress. The literature review cites previous research showing that nightmares in children are not just harmless dreams. Studies such as Guzman et al. And Gauchet et al. Connect chronic nightmares to mental health behavior difficulties, while Liu et al. Links nightmares and poor sleep to self-injury risks in adolescence. Other reviews, such as Q et al. And Rousseau and Bellevue, show that psychological treatments may help, but more research is still needed in children. The gap in the research was that although chronic nightmares in children are linked to sleep problems and emotional distress, there were limited evidence-based treatments based specifically with children and adolescents. Many existing nightmare treatments were developed for adults, so this study aimed to test whether a child-focused cognitive behavioral therapy delivered through telehealth could reduce nightmares and improve sleep in young ages. The research problem is that children and adolescents can experience chronic nightmares that disrupt sleep and cause emotional distress. But there are not many evidence-based treatments tests specifically for youth, especially treatments that can be delivered through this telehealth. The research question asks whether a cognitive behavioral therapy for nightmares in children delivered through telehealth can reduce nightmare frequency, sleep disruption, and nightmare exposure related distress in children and adolescents aged 6 to 17. The hypothesis was that children and adolescents who received the telehealth CBT nightmare treatment would show greater improvement in nightmares and sleep outcomes than children placed on the waitlist control group. Methodology. The study used a quantitative experimental design because the researchers measured numerical changes in nightmare sleep and distress. It was a randomized clinical trial because participants were randomly assigned to either a treatment group or a waitlist control group, and this allows the research to compare children who received the therapy with children who had not received yet. The main approach was an experiment, specifically a clinical trial, and the researchers used random assigned to divide participants in two groups. One group received the CBT-NC treatment through telehealth, while the other group was placed on a waitlist. They also collected measurements before and after the treatment to see whether the therapy made a difference. The therapy included psychoeducation about sleep and nightmares, relaxation techniques, anxiety management, sleep hygiene, nightmare exposure, and nightmare prescription. Nightmare prescription is when the child works on changing the storyline or ending the nightmare, making it feel less threatening. Methodology followed a clear step-by-step process. First, the researchers recruited children and adolescents with chronic nightmares. Then, they would measure their symptoms before treatment. After that, participants were randomly assigned to either the treatment group or the waitlist group. The treatment will receive the CBT&C, and both groups were measured again, and the researchers compared the results. To replicate this study, researchers would first recruit children and adolescents aged 6 to 17 who experience chronic distressing nightmares at least once a week. Then, they would collect baseline data about nightmares, sleep, nightmare-related distress, and mental health symptoms. After that, they would randomly assign participants in two groups, a treatment group and a waitlist control group. The treatment group would receive the 5-module Telehealth CBT&C program, while the waitlist group would not receive the treatment during the same period. After the treatment period, researchers would collect the same measurements again and compare the both groups. The researchers wanted to see whether the therapy reduced the number of weekly nightmares, the number of nights with awakenings, and the level of distress caused by nightmares. They also looked at the sleep problems and mental health symptoms to understand the broader effects of the treatment. After understanding the method, the next step is looking at the results, who participated, how data was shown, and what the things revealed, and what limitations we need to consider. This diagram shows how participants moved through the study. The researchers assessed participants for eligibility, excluded those who did not meet the criteria, and ended up with 46 randomized participants, 23 in the treatment group and 23 in the waitlist group. This table shows the demographic characteristics of the sample, including gender, race, ethnicity, household income, and parent-reported mental health disorders. This matters because many participants had mental disorders, especially anxiety, ADHD, and depression. This table shows lifetime traumatic experience reported by caregivers and children. This study found high trauma exposure, which is important because trauma can be connected to nightmares, anxiety, and sleep problems. The data was presented through diagrams, tables, and graphs. The recruitment process was shown in a consort diagram, and participants' characteristics were shown in tables, and the main outcomes were shown through a results table and bar graphs. This table compares the waitlist group and the treatment group after the treatment period. The treatment group had lower scores in all three outcomes, and the p-values showed the difference were statistically different. Figure 3 shows the combined sample before and after the treatment. After receiving the therapy results, participants had fewer nights with awakenings, fewer nightmares, and lower average daily distress. The main limitation of this, as we shown previously before the treatment, fewer awakenings, fewer nightmares, less distress. But the main limitations is that the study is promising, but not definitive. It had only 46 participants, relied on child and parent reports rather than objective sleep tracking, and used clinical samples with high rates of mental health diagnosis and trauma exposure. Because of this, the results may not apply to every child with nightmares. The study gives strong early evidence, but larger and more diverse studies are needed. Now, conclusion and implication. Now that we know the results, the next question is what they mean. This section looks at the researcher's conclusion, whether the study answered its research question, and why the findings matter beyond the study. The researchers concluded that telehealth cognitive behavioral therapy for nightmares in children called CBT and C showed promising results. Children who received treatment had fewer nightmares, fewer nighttime awakenings, and lower nightmare-related distress. And this suggests that chronic nightmares are not just something children must grow out of. They may be treatable. And the findings suggest three important interpretations. Fewer nightmares means that therapy may reduce how often nightmares happen. Fewer awakenings means it may help children sleep more continuously. And lower distress means children may feel less emotionally affected by their nightmares. So the treatment may support both sleep and emotional well-being. So the results address the research gap fairly effectively because the study tests a structured nightmare treatment with children and adolescents instead of only focusing on adults. The findings supported the hypothesis because the treatment group improved more than the waitlist group. However, the study does not completely close the gap because the sample was small and the study relied on self-report and parent-report data, and the participants came from a clinical population. The future implications are important because this study suggests that children's nightmare should be taken more seriously. If a child has frequent nightmares, adults should not automatically dismiss them as normal or harmless. The findings could influence mental health care by encouraging therapists, pediatricians, schools, and parents to screen more carefully for nightmare problems, especially in children with anxiety, trauma, or sleep issues. Because the treatment was delivered through telehealth, it could also make care more accessible for families who cannot easily attend in-person therapy. The bigger impact is that treating nightmares could improve more than sleep. Sleep affects mood, attention, learning, behavior, and emotional regulation. So if chronic nightmares are reduced, children may function better during the day, including at school and at home. Personal reflection. So after analyzing the study itself, I also reflected on why I chose this topic, what I found challenging or interesting, and how I would build on this research with a study of my own. I choose this topic because I have always wanted to understand nightmares more deeply. When I was a child, I experienced many nightmares, and even still now, sometimes I have unpleasant dreams. And because of that, these topics feel personally meaningful to me. I also choose it because I am interested in subjects related to human mind, and especially how sleep, emotional, and the brain are connected. One challenging part for me was realizing that nightmares seem simple at first, but they are connected to many complex ideas, such as sleep disruption, anxiety, trauma, emotional regulation, and mental health. It was also challenging to understand a bit of the therapy method because it included several techniques, including the sleep education, relaxation, anxiety management, nightmare exposure, and the nightmare prescription. So, what I found most interesting was that nightmares are not just the bad dreams. When they happen frequently, they can continue affecting a child after they wake up by disrupting sleep and increasing emotional distress. I also found it interesting that the study tested treatment through telehealth, showing that children may be able to receive the support even they cannot attend therapy in person. To build upon this research, I would create a study focused on how chronic nightmares affect children's daytime emotional regulation and school functioning. I would compare children who experience frequent nightmares with children who rarely experience nightmares. Over several weeks, I would take the participants and parents so they could track the nightmares frequency, sleep quality, morning mood, anxiety levels, attention in school, and daylight tiredness. And why this would be unique? So this would be unique because the original study focused mainly on whether the therapy reduced nightmare and sleep disruption, while my study would focus more on how nightmares affect children during the day. And this could help researchers understand whether treating nightmares might also improve mood, focus, and daily functioning and not just sleep. So, overall, this research showed me that nightmares are more than isolated dreams. They can be connected to sleep, emotions, mental health, and daily life. And this study matters because it suggests that when nightmares become chronic, children may not just have to live with them. Treatment may help. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.